Good evening. For those of you unfamiliar with my work, every year I read through every issue of every English language nutrition journal in the world so you don't have to. Every year, my talks are brand new because every year the science is brand new. I then compile the most interesting, most groundbreaking, most practical findings to new videos and articles I upload every day to my nonprofit site, nutritionfacts.org. Everything on the website is free. There's no ads, no corporate sponsorship, strictly non-commercial, not selling anything. Just put it up as a public service, as a labor of love. New videos and articles every day on the latest in evidence-based nutrition. In my 2012 review, I explored the role diet may play in preventing, treating, and reversing our deadliest diseases. In 2013, I covered the most common conditions. In 2014, I went through our leading causes of disability. This year, I'd like to address some of our most dreaded diseases, and cancer tops the list in the latest Gallup poll. The number one cancer killer in the United States of both men and women is lung cancer. But if you look at the rates of lung cancer around the world, they vary by a factor of 10. If there's nothing we could do to prevent lung cancer, you'd assume the rates would be about the same everywhere. I mean, if it just happened kind of randomly. But since there's a huge variation in rates, you assume there's some contributing cause. And indeed, we now know that smoking is responsible for 90% of lung cancer cases. So if you don't want to die of the number one cancer killer by just not smoking, you can take 90% of your risk and throw it out the window. Colorectal cancer is our second leading cause of cancer death, and for that there's an even bigger spread around the world. So it appears colon cancer doesn't just happen, something makes it happen. Well, if our lungs can get filled with carcinogens from smoke, maybe our colons are getting filled with carcinogens from food. Why do African Americans get more colon cancer than Native Africans? Why that population? Because colon cancer is extremely rare in Native African populations, like more than 50 times lower rates than Americans, white or black. And we used to think it was all the fiber that they were eating. However, the modern African diet is highly processed, low in fiber, yet there's been no dramatic increase in colon cancer rates. And we're not just talking low fiber intake, we're talking United States of America low fiber intake, down to around half the recommended daily allowance. Yet colon disease remains rare in Africa, still 50 times less colon cancer. Maybe it's because they're thinner and exercise more. No, they're not, and no, they don't. If anything, their physical activity levels may actually be lower than ours. So if they're sedentary like us, eating mostly refined carbs, few plant foods, little fiber like us, why do they have 50 times less colon cancer? Well, there is one big difference. The diets of both African Americans and Caucasian Americans is rich in meat, whereas the native Africans' diet is so low in meat and saturated fat. They have cholesterol levels averaging 139 compared to over 200 in the U.S. So, yeah, they don't eat a lot of fiber anymore, but they continue to minimize meat and animal fat intake, supporting evidence that perhaps the most powerful determinants of colon cancer risk are the levels of meat and animal fat intake. So why do Americans get more colon cancer than Africans? Maybe the rarity of colon cancer in Africans is associated with their low animal product consumption. But why? Did you ever see that takeoff of the industry slogan, beef, it's what's for dinner? Beef, it's what's rotting in your colon. And I remember seeing that on a shirt with some friends, and I was such the party pooper, no pun intended, explaining that no, meat is completely digested in the small intestine, never makes it down to the colon, no fun hanging out with biology geeks. But it turns out I was wrong. It turns out up to 12 grams a day of protein can escape digestion, and when it does, it reaches the colon, it can be turned into toxic substances like ammonia. This degradation of undigested protein in the colon is called putrefaction, right? So a little meat can actually end up putrefying in our colon. The problem is some of the byproducts of this putrefaction process can be toxic. The same thing happens with other animal proteins. If you eat egg whites, for example, some of that can putrefy too. You say, well, what are you saying? There's protein in plants too. The difference is that animal proteins tend to contain more sulfur-containing amino acids like methionine, which is found concentrated in fish and chicken, than eggs, less in dairy and beef, but much less in plant foods, which can be turned into hydrogen sulfide in the colon, the rotten egg gas that doesn't just smell bad, but can produce changes in the colon that increase cancer risk. Now, there's a divergence of opinion as to whether it's the animal fat, cholesterol, or animal protein that's most responsible for the increased cancer risk. But, as all three has been shown to have carcinogenic properties, but, does it really matter since the diet high in one is high in the others? But the protein does more than just putrefy, though. Animal protein consumption causes an increase in blood levels of cancer-promoting growth hormone called IGF-1. But remove meat, egg white, and dairy proteins from our diet, and our bloodstream can suppress cancer cell growth about 8 times better. An effect so powerful that Dr. Ornish and colleagues appeared able to reverse the progression of prostate cancer without chemo, without surgery, without radiation, just a plant-based diet and other healthy lifestyle changes. The link between animal protein and IGF-1 may help explain why those eating low-carb diets tend to die sooner. But not just any low-carb diet, specifically those based on animal sources, whereas actually vegetable-based low-carb diets were associated with a lower risk of death. Right? But meat-based low-carb diets are high in animal fat as well. So how do we know it wasn't the saturated fat and cholesterol that was killing people off? It had nothing to do with the animal protein. What we need is a study that, follows a few thousand people and their protein intakes out for 20 years or so, and just see what happens. Who gets cancer, who doesn't, who lives longer. But there'd never been a study like that until now. 6,000 men and women over age 50 across the U.S. followed for 18 years, and those under age 65 with high protein intakes had 75% increase overall mortality, 4-fold increase in dying from cancer. But not all protein, specifically animal protein, right? Which makes sense given the higher IGF-1 levels in those eating excess protein. Eating animal protein increases IGF-1 levels, which increases cancer risk. The sponsoring university sent out a press release with a memorable opening line. That chicken wing you're eating could be as deadly as a cigarette. Explaining that eating a diet rich in animal protein during middle age makes you 4 times more likely to die of cancer, a mortality risk factor comparable to smoking. Look, almost everyone's going to have a cancer cell or a precancerous cell in them at some point. The question is, does it progress? And that may depend on what we eat. See, most malignant tumors are covered in IGF-1 receptors, but if we have less IGF-1, the tumor may not progress. And it wasn't just more deaths from cancer. Middle-aged people who eat lots of proteins from animal sources were found to be more susceptible to early death in general. Crucially, the same did not apply to plant proteins like beans. And it wasn't the fat, it was the animal protein that appeared to be the culprit. So what was the response to this revelation that diets high in meat, eggs, and dairy could be as harmful to health as smoking? One nutrition scientist replied that it was wrong and potentially dangerous. Not the discovery that animal protein may be killing people, but the way they were telling people about it. It could damage the effectiveness of important public health messages. A smoker might think, why bother quitting if my cheese and ham sandwich is just as bad for me? That reminds me of a famous Philip Morris cigarette ad that tried to downplay the risks by saying that you think secondhand smoke is bad, increasing the risk of lung cancer 19%, drinking 1 to 2 glasses of milk every day may be 3 times as bad, 62% increase lung cancer risk, or doubling the risk frequently cooking with oil, or tripling your risk of heart disease eating non-vegetarian, or multiplying your risk 6-fold eating lots of meat and dairy. So they conclude, let's keep some perspective. The risk of lung cancer, the risk of secondhand smoke may be well below the risk reported for other everyday activities. So breathe deep, basically. All right. And that's like saying, oh, don't worry about getting stabbed because getting shot is much worse. How about neither? 2 risks don't make a right. Though you'll note when Philip Morris bought Kraft, they stopped throwing dairy under the bus. So, the heme in the ham may also play a role. Heme iron is the form of iron found in blood and muscle and may promote cancer by catalyzing the formation of carcinogenic compounds. Cancer has been described as a ferrotoxic disease, a disease in part of iron toxicity. Iron is a double-edged sword. Iron deficiency causes anemia, but excessive iron may increase cancer risk by acting as a pro-oxidant, generating free radicals that may play a role in a number of dreaded diseases like stroke. But look, only the heme iron, the blood and muscle iron, right? Not the non-heme iron that predominates in plants. Same with heart disease, only the heme iron. Same with diabetes, only the heme iron. And same with cancer. In fact, you can actually tell how much meat someone is eating by looking at their tumors. To characterize the mechanisms underlying meat-related lung cancer development, they asked lung cancer patients how much meat they were eating and examined the gene expression patterns in their tumors and identified a signature pattern of heme-related gene expression. Though they just looked at lung cancer, they expect these meat-related gene expressions, changes to occur in other cancers as well. The safest form of iron, then, is non-heme iron, found naturally in abundance in whole grains, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils, dried fruit, nuts, and seeds. How much money can be made on beans, though? So the food industry came up with blood-based crisp bread made out of rye and cattle and pig blood. One of the most concentrated sources of heme iron, about 2/3 more than chicken blood, though. If blood-based crackers don't sound appetizing, they do have cow blood cookies or blood-filled biscuits. The filling does end up dark-colored, chocolate-flavored paste with a very pleasant taste. Dark colored because spray-dried pig's blood can have a darkening effect on a food product's color, but the worry is not the color or the taste, it's the heme iron, which because of the potential cancer risk is not considered safe to add to foods for the general population. This reminds me of nitrosamines, a class of potent carcinogens found in cigarette smoke. They are considered so toxic that carcinogens of this strength in any other consumer product destined for human consumption would be banned immediately. And if that were the case, they would have to ban meat. One hot dog has as many nitrosamines and nitrosamines as 5 cigarettes. And these carcinogens are also found in fresh, unprocessed meat as well, beef, chicken, pork. But practice meatless Mondays and you can wake up Tuesday morning with nearly all these carcinogens washed out of your system. So toxic, nitrosamines should be banned immediately, but are still allowed for sale in cigarettes and meat because the carcinogens are found there naturally, right? It'd be illegal to add them, but hey, if they're found there, right? Just like the heme iron, not safe enough to expose the general population to, but allowed for sale at the deli counter. The irony is that the iron and the protein are what the industry boasts about, right? Those are supposed to be the redeeming qualities of meat, right? Protein and iron. But sourced from animal foods may do more harm than good. And that's not to mention all the other stuff, like the saturated fat and industrial pollutants and hormones that may play a role in our third leading cancer killer, breast cancer. Steroid hormones are unavoidable in food of animal origin, but cow milk may be a particular concern. The hormones naturally found in even organic cow's milk may have played a role in the studies that found that a relationship between milk and dairy products with human illnesses, not just like teenagers' acne, but prostate, breast, ovarian, and uterine cancers, many chronic diseases plaguing the Western world, as well as male reproductive disorders, from an increased risk of early puberty all the way to endometrial cancer in older women. But hormonal levels in food could be particularly dangerous in the case of vulnerable populations such as young children and pregnant women, in which even a small hormonal intake could mean a large change in metabolism. Look, dairy milk evolved to put a few 100 pounds onto a calf, right? But the consequences of a lifetime of human exposure to growth hormones in milk has not been well studied. Look, we know milk consumption increases IGF-1, which is linked to cancer, and we're milking cows while they're pregnant, leading to particularly high levels of hormones. Although dairy products are an important source of hormones, other products of animal origin must be considered as well. This could explain why women can cut their breast cancer risk more than half by not just being normal weight and limiting alcohol, but also eating mostly foods of plant origin. Now, to help differentiate the effects of diet from other behaviors like smoking, drinking on overall cancer incidence, Adventists were compared to Baptists. Now, both discourage alcohol and tobacco, but Adventists go further, encouraging reduction of meat. In general, the Adventists had less cancer than the Baptists, and within Adventist populations, the vegetarians did even better, and those eating the most plant-based did the best. All edible tissues of animal origin contain estrogen. This may explain why women avoiding all animal products have a twinning rate which is 1/5 that of vegetarians and omnivores. It appears vegan women have 5 times fewer twins, presumed to be because they're not exposed to all these hormones in the diet. Now, why is that a good thing? Because twin pregnancies can unfortunately be risky pregnancies for both mom and the babies, which may be 10 times more likely to die at birth. To avoid these complications, women attempting conception may want to consider avoiding milk and dairy products. And this isn't even talking about the synthetic hormones that are injected, implanted, and fed into farm animals. In 1979, an epidemic of breast enlargement was noted in Italian children. Poultry or veal was suspected because they were using estrogens to accelerate weight gain. So after this episode, Europe banned the use of anabolic growth promoters in agriculture and banned the importation of American meat ever since, because we continue to inject animals with drugs like Zeranol, sold as Ralgro Magnum. You drip Zeranol-containing blood from implanted cattle onto normal breast cells, human breast cells in a petri dish, and you transform them into breast cancer cells within 21 days. Okay, but people aren't petri dishes. Because these anabolic growth promoters in meat production are by far the most powerful, potent hormones found in human food, we really should be testing people, especially children, before and after eating meat. Until we do that, we really don't know what kind of threat they pose. Though the fact that Zeranol is as potent as DES should concern us. DES is another synthetic estrogen marketed to pregnant women, all pregnant women, until 1971, when it was shown to cause cancer of the vagina in their daughters. But it was also used in meat. In the absence of effective federal regulation, the meat industry uses hundreds of animal feed additives with little or no concern about the cancer-causing and other toxic effects. Illustratively, after decades of misleading assurances about the safety of DES in the meat supply, we finally banned it some 40 years after it was already shown to cause cancer. The meat industry then promptly switched to other potentially carcinogenic additives such as this Ralgro Magnum. When girls started dying of vaginal cancer, DES-treated meat was subsequently banned in Europe. However, misleading insurances, including the deliberate suppression of residue data, managed to delay a U.S. ban on DES in the meat supply for another 8 years. Where are we today? Virtually the entire U.S. population consumes without any warning, label, or information unknown, unpredictable amounts of hormone residues in meat products over a lifetime. If all hormonal and carcinogenic feed additives aren't banned immediately, the least we could do is label them. Label the hormone residue levels in all meat products, including dairy and eggs. Speaking of eggs, the next on the dreaded list of diseases is heart disease.